All right, great. Now we're recording.
Okay. So I added this onto the back of my previous presentation, which I'm flipping through here. Just goes through some of the initial design iterations and thinking, and then my initial grasshopper script. And then what I did was, again, with the idea of trying to come up with a facade that was as simple and cost effective as possible. Focused in on three of those, or three different panels, and I ended up taking one of the suggestions from the previous presentation in terms of modifying the width of the center square on this trapezoid. And so with the idea that more or less light can be let in, and then depending on which side of the facade they're on, that impacts which panel is used. And so I have three different panels here. Obviously the most restrictive would be for the south facing side of the building. The east and west are in the middle, and then the north facing side of the building has the widest opening. Here are a couple different perspectives once I apply it to the building. Try to zoom in a little bit. Here you can see how I think this is the east or west face of the building. And then moving to the second page here, this is the north side of the building that faces the park, has the widest opening with the most light let in. I have different elevations here, the north and the south. Again, just kind of zooming in between those two, you see the difference between the north elevation having the greatest opening and the south elevation having the smallest opening on that facade. And then the east and west have the same size opening, or same panel.
So I'm a little, so when you have these true east and true west elevations, the building is twisting. So that's why I'm interested in, like, actually, so when you say this facade's the south facade, to a degree, because it's twisting and you're going to get, your exposures are going to change, right? So that's where it's like we should start seeing a gradation of that, or and start to see how that behavior changes, because you're saying how each module is different on each facade. That's true, but each facade is also twisting up and it's changing as you go up.
Sure.
So that's some of the things that we're looking for, is just how that adaptive facade is changing when the building mass is changing.
Sure. And I guess the degree to which, or the quantity of different panels, or the number of different panels I choose, probably will largely affect that. If I had 15 or 20 different panels, obviously that variation would be quite a bit more. With 3 panels or with limited panels, a slight change in the torsion of the building, I think in many cases may not necessarily affect which panel would apply for that face, but yeah, certainly I understand the what you're mentioning there. So, and
even, some of the connections, or even how this is tied back to the facade of the building, if understanding what's happening, is this actually like integral into the building envelope, or is this like a curtain wall system, and or
Sure.
is this like a secondary skin on top of a curtain wall? Like
The-
some of that stuff is like also it's like I was hoping to see if like what's really going on with it.
Sure. The way I proposed it last time, and I guess is still the idea here, is that this would be a secondary skin that gets applied to the building. In terms of specific connections, I guess I'm not. I'm still working on that. I'm not certain how that looks like, or what the best application of that would be, or how to think through that. So. But the general idea is that it's a relatively lightweight secondary skin that gets applied to the building.
So John, let me suggest it's possible to over-constrain the exercise. In a certain sense, there isn't any cost in this case because it's a studio.
Yeah.
I think you could make the same assumption and say I'm only going to provide one panel, and then it would completely defeat the intention of the studio as a parametric studio. So I think you may need to loosen up on your self-imposed constraints as being beyond the nature of the studio and maybe undermining it. And so I think you have to at least allow 5 or 7 or something to engage the topics of the studio. Further,
Yeah.
I'm concerned too, your assumption about the south may not be entirely correct, in the sense that really when you're talking about shading on the south, you want overhang shading because the sun is above. You don't necessarily want narrowing. You simply want to block the sun. Okay, and so in reality, the correct panel for the south would be one that prioritized an overhang. Whereas on the east and west, where you get direct side-to-side sun, you don't necessarily want more opening. You want to do side shading so that you blank off part of the sun angle and that from that orientation. So really a south panel is one that's got an overhang like this, and an east and west panel has got overhangs like this, not necessarily the size of the aperture. And so I think you want to actually maybe revisit or correct those assumptions about what, quote, the sun wants to do or the panel wants to do.
Okay.
And then I really do think that John's right, that you have to show some degree of parametric engagement with what's happening up the building. You could, help me out with this, John, this is what Leland showed with their design study in Beijing, is that actual daylight quantity as opposed to sunlight access produced a different orientation of panels, because the daylight down there in the street is quite low in a certain sense as opposed to higher up in the sky. So you could actually artificially create or realistically create a top to bottom gradient, as well as a twist gradient like this, based on anything that could measure the ambient daylight within your model. So that would be another way.
Yes, and actually they've done a solar study on this, so this would be and that's something in the beginning when John, you're saying about how it's responding to the sun, and it's like show us how it's responding, actually point us that this is going to be the daylight rays to it, or and since everything is about the solar, you've done the solar study before, so it's good to just use that data to plug right into it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest comment too, echoing what Eric said about the, which apertures are on which side of the building and why, along with adding the parametric element to it, especially if you have the solar analysis done. It's not a plug and play by any means, but it's that kind of idea that you have all this information there, and now you want to use it to make your design better and more effective. Because this is like right now you kind of have I'll almost say the analog version of the parametric design, where you've designed these 3 modules and you're just placing them on the building because of preconceived notions and assumptions. But now you want to take that data and really force it into that stream and really come up with something that's organic and unique, but also very accurate and efficient based on the data.
And John, for my information, you did your 4 different panels, was it did you feel like the assignment was from the first part? When I said there, I want to see 4 modules. Were you like, okay, I'm going to stick to those 4 modules, or did you understand like these are just 4 examples of variations of the modules?
I think my impression was we had there was some latitude in terms of how many modules we used, and that was a design decision. So I maybe constrained myself a little bit too much in terms of the narrative of trying to go with the most economical design possible, but I can certainly look at adding more module options in the future. Yeah. It'll probably be more constrained by my working through an understanding of Grasshopper and trying to incorporate something that is actually presentable. I'm still very much learning and exploring and trial and error. So,
No, that's why we're all here. It's to learn. So
right.
No problem.
I think also too an interesting thing, John, to do would be when you're with your renderings, make them also at street level or in the air and do a shadow study. I think there's a lot more really fascinating information you could drag out of even the most minimalist scheme in terms of what is this thing. People do experience shadows on the ground, and of course we see it from the ground. And so I think those would both be very interesting aspects to see more information about.
Sure. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One comment about the Grasshopper is definitely a hard thing to learn, and it takes time. But one thing that might help you and also help us and John help you more is show us, just try it. Try to do something, and then even present that, even if it's terrible and really ugly. Like show us, and we can, we might be able to give you some suggestions on, you just have to, use this component and do that, or point in the right direction or something like that.
Okay.
I mean, we're happy to help out.
Sure.
All right. Thanks, John.
Yep.
Hey, Aaron, you go up next?
Okay. So my module has changed considerably since the last presentation that we had. My design, the location for it is here in Tyler, Texas, where I live. When we first started talking about, having a design that might have some contextual relationship to the place that it was in, our city is known as the Rose City, or the Rose Capital of Texas. And so I kept trying to draw out these, before I made the last module, I kept trying to draw out these like rose patterns that I didn't like at all, and I didn't feel like I wanted to work with. But then I went back and revisited that, and then focusing more on the thorn pattern. So that's where my module, let me see if I can go to the next page. There we go. Where my module, these are just a few iterations. Basically, I have 3 triangular panels, and then one, it's not a triangle, but 3 different points that move in the panels, creating, the first one is if they were all the same. The second one is just general, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but these 3 points here are the ones that move vertically. So they create different shapes. The third one includes if some panels ended up being taken away. And the fourth one, which would be my ultimate goal, but might be a little too much to bite off at this point, would be show different levels of translucence. So you'd have darker panels and then lighter panels. And similar to John, my focus is the sun, and how the panels would need to be present or not present for the amount of light that's coming through. That hasn't changed from the last iteration. But I haven't gotten that far. But I did put together the tower in Rhino I had the facade completely stuck to the massing model, but I ended up offsetting it out away from it, so it becomes a secondary skin. And the pattern here is just one module. I haven't quite figured out how to do the variations yet. So this is just showing one specific set of where the points are. But like I said, the goal being possibly the third or fourth options that I'm showing there overall for the whole tower based on the sun study that we have once I get that incorporated into the script. And then just a couple, these are just Google pictures that I found. This is how I imagine it being attached to the building, being separate from it, separate panels. Then they, form their different shape, and then just have my script at the end.
I think that I think taking that a step back, I think that helps a lot on what you're doing, and those quick diagrams that you did are really really effective on just getting an idea of quick, like how is this thing could respond, and how is this and different pattern ideas of how it's responding. But I'm curious on when you're saying it's the rows, is it just like you're just grabbing the image of the rows, right? It's not like it's like a rose is an interesting example, interesting study. Also, like, what can we learn from that? Like, is it how it blooms, or is that how the panels transform based off like how it blooms? Does it like twist when it blooms? Does it just open up?
So what I envisioned was basically instead of the rose itself, the thorn of the rose, like the stem of it, and then the building, I'm not sure how to describe it, but becoming like it's encased in these like brambles all the way up.
Got it.
You might have different, it doesn't have to be green. I feel like that might be a little too on the nose, but if it's different shades of it or different variations of that, like I feel like it could almost like a stained glass, really interesting pattern as it travels up or into the light or away from the light.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, and see, but some of that light studies is seeing how it behaves. Like some of that, like let's see that. Like I think I'm really interested in seeing how this this really sharp object, it could look really cool, but let's see how it can behave and how it can be successful in using and shading the sun. I'm glad you showed some examples of like spider connections and like built-in glass and stuff like that. But then it's like let's see that, like it's one thing to show an image, but let's see how it actually works with your system. Like I'd say this would be great. This would be a good first step from last class, but now we gotta crank it up a little bit and start developing this and the behavior of it. Yeah, and I like the idea of how you changing the materials of like it becomes a little more perforated or it becomes like a translucent. It's like let's start experimenting on this on the tower.
Okay.
What kind of materials are you thinking for this? Like, is this, are these glass panels that are offset, or are these metal or fabric, or kind of what are they?
I initially just had glass in mind. You have the curtain wall, and then outside of it, you have another, shell of glass. If I'm able to do the different, visibility through the panels, I would say that some of them might not be glass. They might just be a solid material, maybe metal. I'm not sure. It started off as glass, but I don't think it all has to be glass panels. I think it could vary based on the needs of the shading.
Well, you said it was a second skin, so you already have the glass behind it.
Right.
So it can just be this metal form, right, that sticks outside.
Yeah, I think it could be an interesting study to see the different materials too, right? Like if some of them are glass and some of them are perforated metal and some of them are solid metal, or some of them are a translucent glass versus a transparent glass, or maybe they're slightly tinted, some of them, or there's a whole bunch of different variations just on materiality choices that could make this thing more parametric. Like you could, in that sense, it's almost a materiality study more than a formal study, because you could have the same form go all the way up the building and then say, oh, because it's on this side of the building and it's getting this much sun, this one's going to be solid and this one's going to be translucent and this one's going to be transparent. You do something like that. But I think also with your form as you want it, if you want it to have the kind of weaving bramble idea crawling up the building, I think that's a really interesting idea, because the thing that kind of brings it back to the rows and growing, and it almost seems like there's another parameter that's like, the higher up the panel goes, the smaller your negative space is there. And so you have these thicker like trunks almost at the bottom, where maybe the bottom of the building is mostly translucent, and part of that is, or transparent, I should say. And part of that might be because if this is a tower and there's a city around it and all that stuff, more light, you want to get more light down in there because you don't have that opportunity quite as much, whereas up higher you can close it off a little bit more because there's more light available to you. But that could be a really interesting idea, and I think you might need to just kind of tweak a couple of your points where they end up connecting kind of more side to side than just vertical, just to try to get more of a weaving pattern. But that would be pretty cool.
And then Aaron, do you conceive this as primarily flat? It doesn't necessarily have any movement in and out?
Right.
Do you need that for any kind of, insulation value? Are you even worried about that? I'm going to suggest for this class, probably you don't. Looking at a rose bush on my screen here and trying to figure out what makes a bramble. It's a great word. I fully agree. It's a terrific word. Imagine, however, that if indeed you're kind of talking about petals and stems, then the connection aspect of this might be really interesting. It's not about just the spider clip that grabs the panel. It's about the trunk or the stem of the bramble itself. And so imagine you have a vertical, framing system or something that goes up and down your building. Okay. That can obviously be something that, it's predominantly vertical. So it's got a vertical grain to it. Then imagine, for instance, that you took the panels and you moved them inside of the framing network or outside of the framing network. So you might have offsets of 6 inches. And so sometimes the panel or sometimes the stems are showing up, and sometimes the stems are obscured by the leaves. And so, in other words, there's the parametrics of the panel proper, but then there's dimensionality, in terms of thickness and in terms of enriching your bramble metaphor of sometimes I see the stem, sometimes I don't see the stem. It's this very dense and thick and kind of random, gnarly assembly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like, Eric, how you described that, and actually it contradicts a lot of Aaron's like previous details of like Pilkington and spider connections, where it's trying to modularize this. While it wants to be, it's all about the connectivity of and this continuity of all these stems that are traveling up the building and these thorns. And so just again, how it's really important to establish that concept and continue with it, and really just dig into, okay, what's the behavior of a rose bush or brambles, and how the behavior and how that influences the big picture, but also even down to the minute details of how that detail's expressed. So just think about like how that can be expressed throughout the facade.
Aaron, there's actually a command in Grasshopper called gnarly. But my point would be is you could show us the visual definition of gnarly, and it would be, what does a script for gnarly look like? That would be great.
I'll put that in my notes.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank y'all.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Hey, Nora, do you want to go next?
Yep. Share my screen. Can you see my screen?
There we go. Yeah.
So my design has changed a lot since last time. I know it was mentioned because I was more interested in the openings last time to try and design more with that and to try and demonstrate that more in my uh, skin. So over here I just had the layout of it, and then because it is serving as a secondary skin, I have it spaced off the building a bit, but this is how it serves onto the building. So I have different views from each face of the building, and then some perspective views, and then over here I have two of the renderings to see it from the streets and how it would serve as a day-to-day.
Do you have an up close of it? Or
Yes, you took the words
Actually-
right out of my mouth. Yeah.
You may have, your connection may have frozen. I wonder.
Uh-oh.
Sorry, is that okay?
Yeah, could you zoom in a little bit?
In the
The
rendering?
yeah, I just see like how these are working together, and I'm trying to understand the module as well. It's interesting how you're stepping it. It's almost like a ziggurat.
I played a lot with Weaverbird this time to help me try and construct the design. So I know that it'd be beneficial to do the solar analysis for next time and just try to see if I know it is a bit, has various openings. So maybe trying to simplify it more, but I was just fascinated by all of them. So I wanted to try and include them as much as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, there's that form that you're creating is really could be really interesting because that also could be responding to either help with the solar control or like sun control or just the design. Maybe it's just parametrically as the travels up, it gets more more ribs to it. But that's an interesting.
Well, Nora, within the pattern distribution on any given level, do you have an algorithm or something that varies the panels? So zoom in close again so we can see it. From this point here, it looks quite similar. Once you zoom in close, you can see variations on any given floor, right?
Mm-hmm.
What governs that?
I just had it laid out 12 by 6 of the modules, sorry.
Zoom in closer again still though. I mean, it looks like there's some micro variation, right? Or are they all the same? There's some variation in there.
Yeah, sorry, they are.
What governs that?
The different modules, I just constructed them side by side. They're going in and out differently.
Okay.
So
is there a way that you could describe what that is, like a rhythm AA, BBA, or is there any way to understand it?
I didn't have enough time to make a diagram this time, but sorry.
Well,
My internet's being a little laggy.
it looks like very similar to something like a Weaverbird component where it meshes, it takes everything, it breaks up into a mesh, and then it extracts every other vertex. That's what it looks like. So it's like you came up with this form, and then you had Weaverbird help create the meshed it, and then you subtracted every other mesh with that Weaverbird component. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was experimenting a lot with Weaverbird this time.
So that's how you get your variation, because as the form kind of changes as it moves up, the algorithm that meshes this changes how the logic of how it meshes. So it may have a lot more vertices, or one or two more vertices less than the one adjacent to it. It's interesting. I think it's a really interesting pattern that you're creating, and now I'm intrigued in just like how we can achieve that and just the details of it. And it's like a module within a module, which could be some really cool details but yeah, the variation of it is really just based off the form of it. It's not really responding to anything outside, right? Other than the panel itself.
Mhm.
So part of that is, since that's an algorithm that's already written that help, it's completely based off the form and the edges of that mesh. So to help control that, you could start to look into how the size of your module changes, which then affects the density of how you can how the algorithm takes out those panels. If that makes sense.
Mhm.
I think that's what I'm wanting to see a little bit more of, is what is it that controls it, right? Like right now, your form is controlled by the form and the base geometry, and it creates an interesting pattern, and it's cool, and all that. But at the same time, what is the goal, right? If it's allowing light in or blocking sunlight, that they should also be responding to not only the form, but also the sun in some way, or wind, or whatever that other parameter is. And then that'll just take it one step further, where these small variations that you have all of a sudden become much more dramatic, and probably a lot more just kind of have more of a wow factor, really, when you're looking at it and you can see, oh wow, like this face compared to this face, or as the building turns, you'll get more of a sweeping kind of gradient, or just a really more pronounced pattern and variation on the pattern across the building, and it'll take it up another notch.
I think also too, Nora, it would be good, based on what John has got here in terms of connection details, to provide a close-up of this in any form and say, how am I supporting that, or what is it made of? I mean, it actually could be really beautiful in terms of it dematerializes this facade because it has so much dimension. I'm curious what it lives on. What do all those varying panels actually live on as a framework?
Yes. Absolutely.
Because at some point the framework can become dominant. I'm not saying it should. I'm just saying it could be. It would be lovely if there was a really simple framework that all those things hung on in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks, Nora.
Thank you.
Melissa, do you want to go next?
Sure, I can go.
All right.
All right. So from last time, my narrative revolved around creating a facade that lowered the carbon footprint of the building, I guess. In terms of energy is really what I was thinking. So I developed the module that utilized solar panels. You can't quite see it, but this is kind of a close-up version where there's a solar panel. This is actually 2 modules. You'll see better when I come down, but basically this part is the solar panel. This part is, I was sort of thinking or looking into a material like that could gain solar heat, and then the solar heat could be pulled into the building to kind of lower the cost of heating and things like that. So that's kind of the metal panel on the side. This is basically what the module is. It's 2 different pieces, and then they were flipped, so they're sitting side by side. So this is the window portion, and then this is the metal portion, or the solar, I guess the solar, I'm drawing a blank on the word right now.
Solar thermal.
Yeah, there we go. This solar thermal panel that will pull the warm air in. And then, so these are my elevations. pretty basic. I did run there it goes. I did run a solar because the module was changing the angle of the solar panel, and I was kind of a little disappointed with. I guess it didn't react the way that I was envisioning it to. I thought that if the panel had a larger degree, then it would pull in more sun energy. And based on the solar analysis, I really couldn't see it. I was expecting to see more, more yellow pieces, I guess, in the bottom or something that would be gaining more solar energy, but it really didn't respond the way that I was thinking. And then this is my script, which actually doesn't print out as a high resolution, so I'm not really sure how to make that smaller. I don't know. I guess I'm becoming less thrilled with my module as I continue with this. But it's kind of late in the game, so I don't know really.
Well, what makes it you're not too thrilled about it?
Well, let me just say, I show that my family, and my family's like, "That's so boring, Mom." So, like, I don't know. I mean, but okay. So then there's two things. Like, if I'm looking at carbon footprint, I feel like the massing is all wrong because I'm looking at the bottom of my building, and it's got so much metal down there where I feel like the way that the parametric, the skin on it, when you divide up the section, I can't have it any smaller up top because my panel won't fit up on the top. It'll overlap each other. So because I have it set to a certain size for the length of a solar panel. I don't know. I'm less thrilled with it as I keep moving forward. So any suggestions?
Well, the one thing I noticed was like the solar panel is like this small little.
It's tiny.
Sill, and we're talking about being sustainable and carbon footprint, and it's almost like, do you want to express that more? It seems like it's a very subtle detail, and do these things actually become more like a fin that rotates up with the tower?
I don't think the rotation on the actual side of the building makes any difference whatsoever. I mean, I feel like based on looking at it, because I degreed it 30 degrees and then I degreed it 1 degree, and I mean, if you look at the solar, the sun on it, it's exactly the same. The only thing that's different is that when I have more of a degree, because then what happens is the metal on the side gets pulled out almost the same amount. So when the panel has an angle, the metal pulls out. So that's why you get more of a shading around the windows. So that's why all the windows are, red or, I don't know. I'm just a little disappointed as I've moved through this. And
could you imagine, maybe Melissa, that it's not one, when we speak of our module or one module or the module, maybe it could logically be something else. I mean, on the north side, PV isn't really relevant.
No, it's not. It's all blue. So
right, exactly. And so in a certain sense, your module, since it directly relates to sun exposure, might make sense on the southeast and southwest facades. And then somehow it goes away or changes or becomes only one of these two elements, or something else, a third. I mean, there's glass in there somewhere. So you have metal panel for solar thermal, and you have photovoltaic. But where's the glass? Right? If you zoomed in close, where is the glass?
Yeah, so it's easiest to see on probably, hang on, it's lagging. Oh, there it is. It's easiest to see on this, but the glass is actually this part, these two pieces right here. And like I said, in the bottom, I mean, it feels like this should be the glass. And because there's so much metal, so I feel like the massing is different. So if it more you know, like rectangular, so that I could fit a certain amount, and then and then my next section is tapered in, and then I can space them out more, like, and make this metal piece skinnier, because it's skinny going up at the top, and then my window becomes, you know, it's basically a double window.
Right. I think there's got to be a way to introduce some other variation as you rotate around. What happens on the north side or something like that. So you may be constrained in terms of the quantity of glass or the amount of PV or something, but as you rotate around, you can do some changes, or there might be a way to think about a density or switching, as you said, maybe at the bottom, there's a way to swap things out with some logical algorithm. I don't know what that is. I think at this point, the rotation isn't going to tell you enough. And I think you don't have enough. Somehow we need to invent some more variables that you can then modify.
Yes.
Got some ideas?
I'll work on it. In the meantime, tell your family. In the meantime, tell your family it's subtle. Okay, this is subtle. You got to get with it. Okay, it's subtle.
So I think my suggestion is, so it sounds like when you did your sun studies, you were rotating the solar panels. They're all rotated the same amount, correct?
Yes.
So I think you should,
yeah, go ahead,
like, almost quite literally flip the script, so to speak, where your rotation is based on the sun rather than your sun being based on the rotation. Because
okay,
what you have is you have all the numbers of, like if you scroll down to the solar analysis,
yep,
kind of explain it a little bit, where you see the red and the yellow on the building in the base one where it's only 1 degree.
yes,
You're always going to get the same amount of sun in those locations. That's
yes,
actually not going to change.
yes,
So you have those numbers. So maybe based on the darker orange space, you get a certain rotation. And then in the middle space, you get another rotation. And then in the yellow, you get another rotation. So then you're starting to respond to the actual sun, right? That's kind of the whole goal. So where there's more sun, it's a certain rotation to capture more light. And then that provides more shading and, kind of brings the whole project holistically together. And then maybe on the north side, it's, flat up against the building, and maybe it's at that point not an actual PV panel, and it's a piece of glass to mimic that or something, right? So then it kind of goes away and becomes this flat piece so you have an all flat facade that goes all the way up. And then on the other ones, you start to get these kind of like fins that are just kind of like sticking out seemingly random angles as they rotate around. And maybe that's how you kind of create a more dynamic building, and maybe it's not quite as boring then.
No, I think
subtle.
Sorry.
I think that's I like Jason's idea. Just it adds those having that fin effect. I think would actually have a little more definition to it, and having it changing based off the different designs. I think would help a lot.
okay, thanks, guys.
No problem. Thank you. All right. Hey, Megan, you want to go next?
Sure. Let's start here. So just to jog y'all's memory, I was the palm tree and started out with this. And I took y'all's suggestions and I got the markers out, wrote down some thoughts, and streamlined it a little bit, and came up with this design. And I have a couple questions, and I kind of stalled out, got stuck in Grasshopper. But my thoughts were, essentially there's just 2 panels here, and I wanted to once I get them into Grasshopper, I want to have 3 variations of each panel, the same variation, so that I'll have 6. Not sure what that. And then I briefly got started on Grasshopper, but I kind of stalled out a little bit.
Could you zoom in on your, are you showing just the, a little section of?
Yeah, it's just like a.
Can you zoom in on that?
Yeah.
And also, do you have an image of how you color coded your facade? So we can take.
You mean like with the marker? Is that
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Is that me? That's strange. I don't have my scanner yet, it's still in a box. So all I have is just like hand drawings. I feel like I'm in kindergarten class. I don't think you all can really see these from here. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit of a mess today.
Do you have this in 3D? I mean, in some sense of the overall building, not straight elevation?
No, I don't, because I got stuck in Grasshopper. Although I think I did make a little headway, just not enough to even show you all. The only thing I have 3D, and I showed John this last week, was just a little 3D model print of like one of the panels. Essentially, it'll be like it's a skin. It'll be like a web going up the building. And as far as the juncture of the two, it's like one palm coming down into another here. I'm still working out how I want it to connect to itself.
While you're telling us this, zoom in on what you've shown right here. Can we see the new pattern up close, straight on?
Yeah. Yeah. I showed John this last week. And there's 2 ways I could go. I could go with the panel, or I could even like vary the length of the panels up, and that gets more and more complicated. And then part of me worries that I don't want it to look too much like a palm tree, because that would look pretty tacky. So there's that as well.
Zoom in closer. Your screen hasn't changed yet.
It's not changing? Am I still lagging?
Yeah, it's still the same.
We've been wrestling with infinity today, trying to get the internet to work at the new house. It's not changing?
No.
This is fun. Okay.
So yeah, it's
maybe if I stop share and share again.
Okay.
Let me try that.
There we go.
Yeah, nice.
Okay. Is that better? Is that as close as? Okay.
Yeah, that's good. But yeah, it's with yours, it's tough to understand. I mean, it's great that you did a quick 2D exercise that you can start to understand just a little bit more of it. But yours actually has a pretty dynamic 3-dimensional aspect to it, and having that one segment to 3D print showed that was really good. It was like, okay, we can start to get an idea of it. But again, we need to see like the connectivity of it between the modules. It's tough to get any feedback to you when there's we haven't seen anything when it's just a 2D drawing right now. And even with talk to me. We can schedule some office hours on just getting this thing in 3D. I know there's quite a bit of tutorials I've talked about and shown of different ways we can do this. It doesn't have to be all in Grasshopper. It can be half in Grasshopper and half in Rhino. So there's a lot of different ways that we can do this and make it simple for you. So,
Megan, what is beyond the triangular shapes? Is that glass beyond the triangular network? Have you thought about how you would, I mean, so I think there's, of course, the white line that indicates the boundary of the module, perhaps. Is that
Correct.
also a joint in the glass? So in a certain sense, you've got a really dynamic form lacing its way up the building.
Mhm.
There's this secondary background layer, which is how do I joint the glass?
Right.
What do I do with that? You know, and if you look at your palm tree image, of course, there's the larger, you know, things that go over each other. But then each of those is made of some kind of ropey, fibery material, which is like a
Right.
secondary texture. And so I do think that one way, you know, without getting literal about it, you nonetheless can create a secondary texture in here, maybe in the
Okay.
glass joint or something else. I was going to go so far to suggest that you could use spider clips and maybe like the palmetto bugs, but that would be really tacky. So
But you're doing all the right things, and like you have it organized on a grid. I mean, there's a lot of good logic here that, man, it can, we can put this into, we can really start to script this really easily because you made all the right steps early on.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
think,
just need to make a big push, and I think I'll take you up on that office hours. But I just need to make a big push in Grasshopper in the next 2-3 days, and just get over that hump
Mhm.
goal, and then have something to show for it.
Yeah.
I have a few ideas. Do y'all have any ideas as far as like keeping my theme in mind and the inspiration? Like, is there any fun, cool tools that will fit into what I'm working on that I can use to vary the panels? Because right now I just have the two. They're cool, but I'd like to try to do something a little different.
I think
I think, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry, John. I think my
No.
biggest suggestion is to not worry so much about, like, not worry so much about having 3 panels or 4 panels or 5 panels to start with, because to me, in my personal process, that's just one step further than I need to go to start. The first thing I need to do is create a million different panels. So as they come up the building, they might not be, so like you have 2 panels right now and you've alternated them and put them up, and that looks good. So now I think the next step would be to say, okay, what are my parameters that are changing based on height? Would be a first one that I would start. So the Z location in each of these panels, based on that, maybe maybe the panel shifts right or left or something, or in or out or up or down, however that works. And every panel can be different at that point, because then in my mind it's easier to create a million of them first, because that's what Grasshopper is good at, and then take a step back later and say, okay, now how can I reduce this to 5 panels or something, or 6 or 3 or whatever it is, because you almost creating, to me personally, John might be different, anybody else might be different in this too, to me, creating that extra parameter and limitation of saying I can only do 5 of these and they all have to connect perfectly the first time becomes really difficult, and it stalls you almost in your brain, because you get so focused on that you don't just let the design kind of create itself, and then you kind of tone it back, and then very carefully go back and select what really makes it unique and stands out and efficient and beautiful all at the same time.
Okay. I'll try to focus on that height thing. It keeps coming up, and I've been avoiding it because I don't quite know how to handle it in the script. But I think I just need to do it, because each one of us has said it at some point over the last few weeks. So I think it just needs to happen. And I have an idea as how to do it. I know what I want it to look like. I just don't know how to get there, but I'll figure it out.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, Troy, do you want to go next?
All right. 1 second. Can you hear me this week?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
All right. And can you see my screen?
It's starting. Hold on. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So my original concept was working with the idea of the muscle fibers and also a screen shade. trying to work in those two different ideas to create an exterior skin that could go over the building for light control, which led me to the idea of the different Voronoi options. So with the Voronoi panels, the idea with the Voronoi is that each opening is really unique and different, and accordingly, muscle fibers are made up of muscle cells, which are all different and unique, and as they engage and disengage, that's what helps to cause the movement. So when you bundle all of the fibers together, you get the body of the muscle, which is what most people think of for movement, but in reality, it's the action of the small parts and the small fibers that create that change. So that idea was really to then use those openings as controlling light. So the different panel proposals, and I've been working a lot with the script and trying to get everything in here. I was able to get the Voronoi on the structure, but right now it's not really working right. It is see-through. I actually turned off the base structure of the building so it would show a little bit better. Otherwise, it tends to just get absorbed into the base structure of the tower, and it kind of goes away. But you can't see any of the Voronoi. It really is, it's not looking right. So that was one perspective. Another perspective view, it's interesting because it kind of looks like liquid silver pouring over the building, but in reality, when you look at it, it also looks like a damaged, bent up, twisted box grater, which is not what I'm going for. So this kind of shows the Voronoi box grater effect from like a street level view looking up. And then this would be like if you're on a rooftop adjacent to the site looking across. And then that is my grasshopper script. So right now I have the Voronoi set at, I think, 1200 for the cells. And I feel like I need to up that, but I'm afraid if I up it, I'm going to lose my computer. I don't know if the computer can handle that. So I'm not really sure what to do there. And then also, as far as the script is concerned, I do think I need to offset this a bit more because I can show you in Rhino. When the tower base is turned on, it absorbs the Voronoi. So there's a lot of work I need to do on this yet.
It's really beautiful looking, though. It is pretty amazing. But yeah, it looks like definitely there's even some areas of how it's reading. It seems like it's reading evenly. It's like it seems like it's reading a lot of them on one side, and then on one of the perspectives, it's very large openings, and so. But we can talk after class, and I'll help you out on how we can figure this out. But but do you imagine? So this now this whole building is just going to be cloaked in that Voronoi pattern. Are you breaking up into the panels, or is it just now the full thing is a Voronoi shell?
So right now I have on the two larger facades, it's the same Voronoi, whereas on the sides it is a different one. This one has more of a curve in it on the larger aspects of the tower, and then the smaller ones, it's more of just a vertical slash that came through. For the pattern right now, with the way everything is, you can't see any of that, which is one of the things that needs to be adjusted. I've also been thinking about actually taking some of the other patterns that I have from the 2 weeks ago, and taking maybe another 1 or 2 of those and layering them on top of it, particularly like on a southern exposure, so that it's built up a little bit more to provide an additional layer of sun protection, and also to kind of fill the holes while still keeping some of the holes open, to make different points of view and have a little bit more dimensionality to it.
Well, I don't think you need to stack 2 panels on top. I mean, if you want more dimensionality to it, I mean, that's just part of maybe the behavior of the module. You know, if you want that dimensionality, then maybe the module thickens up a little bit in certain areas, or thins out in others. I think one thing is just also understanding how this is responding to everything, because it just looks like a veil that's over the building, and what is it responding to? Yeah, and like I said, I understand that you're having a little bit of issues with it, but yeah, just things that we can look at after class, and just how this thing can read as behaving with something.
I don't want to toss in. I mean, frankly, this looks like clear fiberglass. If I could make crystalline fiberglass, that's what it would look like. It's actually beautiful. Yeah. But let me suggest the choice of the Voronoi, if that isn't at all flexible. Imagine if it was clear fiberglass, that would be layered things like this, which is actually like muscle fibers. So in a certain sense, the Voronoi is taking a section, cutting the fibers. In reality, with a skyscraper, wouldn't the fibers run parallel to the grain of the muscle, if you will? And that turns 90 degrees, your metaphor, in a certain sense, that the muscle fibers run with the shape of the structure. Another way to achieve this might be some sort of panel structure that densifies an amount of striations or something or other. I have no idea. So if the Voronoi is giving you trouble, maybe you convert it into something that's a density of fibers in some sort of way like that, which is more maybe analogous to muscle fibers.
And that's kind of where I was thinking as well, with potentially switching it up, because as interesting as the Voronoi is, I'm not sure in terms of like having it being parametric, how exactly to get it to respond in more of a parametric way, which is why I was thinking about doing the dual layer, but then also getting it to this point was a lot of work, and there would be times where I'd have to just get up and walk away from my computer for 15-20 minutes and just let it do its thing, because it would just freeze everything up. So I'm a little concerned about the amount of processing power it's taking to get all of this put together as well. And I feel if I go any larger, it could really cause issues just from a technology standpoint. And I do kind of question if it is like fulfilling the needs, the requirements of the assignment.
Well, the interesting thing is, if you didn't mention anything about the Voronoi in this presentation, and you just said this was all about muscle and muscle fiber, I was like, you nail it. Like, it's like, hey, this is awesome. You got it. I think Eric's right. I think this is a good point to depart from the Voronoi and actually study this a little bit further. And we'll just have to, and there's ways that there's data management ways that we can look at to make sure your computer doesn't crash.
Yeah, the main thing that happens when you're dealing with holes, and a lot of them, is just the the processing power it takes to cut the holes in the surface. Just if you decide to not switch it up, which it's up to you. And I do like the analogy of the fibers wrapping the building and becoming a structural membrane. That could be pretty interesting and pretty cool study, as well as the metaphor it really ties in. But if you're going to do this kind of perforated shade, typically what works best from my experience is you make you do it all basically two-dimensional, and you don't ever actually apply it to the building, any geometry, because what you end up doing is you make a map of it and then you end up just using it in the rendering, because the amount of geometry that is actually included in that and applying it to a tower that's gigantic is just insane. And you're going to need millions and millions of holes, and it's going to take hours and days to render, and even, you know, just the geometry itself. So that's kind of one of the data management ways John was talking about too, is like, you know, just creating it 2D and in panels and then rendering it if that's your final output. And then, you know, if you need to make 5 panels or a section of it or whatever for a model, you do that separately almost and work it out. The other thing is, if you do continue on this path, it looks like it almost looks like you have one panel applied to the one facade, so it feels like it's all stretched out. So what I would look into, if you decide to continue with this one again, is panelizing the surface and deconstructing it into smaller squares, which then your module is applied to. And then so you'll have, and that module, you know, is what becomes whatever size that is. So it's not a fixed dimension. And then the amount of holes on each module could vary based on the size of the panel, which then can change in the opening size based on the sun, or, you know, whatever it is. Just as another way to think about it, rather than trying to apply it to the whole thing with one panel.
I was trying to actually get it as several panels or sections going up, but I must have been doing something wrong in the script because it wouldn't work. And I needed to get something for this evening. So I did just put it the full length or the full side. So there was an issue with it dividing it up into panels. And I know in my script, I don't know if I still have them on here, but I must have taken them out and deleted them, but I had an area where I had it split out into the different sections to be able to get it in there, but it wasn't responding correctly.
Well, maybe we'll, I know we talked a little bit offline, so I can help you out on how to wrap things up on this and make sure it doesn't crash on you and get the concept that we've been discussing.
Okay.
But thank you, Troy. This is really, really cool. Even though it may have been a mistake or error, it came out. It's something that's really cool.
It looks cool, but I know it'll never 3D print.
No, that, yeah. All right. Hey, Alice. You want to go next?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I continued on with that narrative of immunity, and really got to thinking about what Eric said last time about more like cell membrane, kind of developing the module, and less about, you know, that representation of the nucleotide that I was thinking about. I feel like that made it more unified. just because each wall of this building is identical. And so it made each wall like one piece rather than several hexagons that had different variations. And so I see this as still having like that offset of the inversion or extrusion, but maybe more the smaller mullions and the inversion, like in these central parts in the but just more inside and more the outside being more open and the bigger windows. And then really thinking about, I know last time we were talking about the very top, you'd want to really utilize those views and the height, and so leaving those as open windows. And I was also thinking about kind of the connection, developing the narrative, and thinking about the Ladybug plugin, which I picked Oklahoma City, just being from Oklahoma and living in Oklahoma City for a little bit, and just how we kind of put on the front of like we're immune to disaster, but like so much disaster hits Oklahoma. Like tomorrow will be the start. They're calling the inauguration of tornado season, so it's pretty much guaranteed that some town somewhere will get destroyed during the season, and it's really interesting to see how towns develop after that and how they unify together and architecturally become better. And like Oklahoma City, this week actually marked the 25th anniversary of the bombing. And like back in the 90s and like early 2000s even, Oklahoma City was like really not a place you'd want to visit. The skyline was definitely not what it is now. It was very like barren, but now it's like definitely a place where people are moving to. There's really nice restaurants, somewhere you can walk around and feel safe. So just like thinking about that, and like the Devon Tower wasn't there, you know, pre-bombing. It's definitely something that's happened recently, most of the skyline, but I was just thinking about like what would a tower like this look there. But I think they would say that about Devon Tower too, 15, or I guess it's maybe older than 15 years now, but you know, in the 90s, would they have ever suspected a 52-story building in the part of the city? And so also just thinking about this virus and continuing those thoughts of what architecture and society is going to look like after all this. Here's a script. I'm still working on the control of the offset, but yeah, we can talk about that later.
Can you zoom in on the panel itself? Do you have a close-up of the panel?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about all I have right now. Let's see.
So it looks like are you envisioning different, like a material change and around each one of those openings? So I see like a darker color, and then there's like a lighter color around that opening.
That was just more representing kind of that extrusion or inversion, and so it's extruded, just the lighting hitting it differently, and that core central part just darker, being more inside.
So that part is actually supposed to pop out a little bit.
Yeah. So I envision like the mullions, like maybe steel or some kind of metal.
Okay. And then would this be? Is this like a secondary skin that's on top of a glass?
Yeah. The edges I think would be exposed just to bring in more light. So yeah, more like a overlay. So
yeah, there's a few things that it's just I would just start to develop is, I think we're at the point where it's like if this thing's supposed to be popping out, let's see it popping out. Let's see if it's the second skin, let's have it pushed off from that initial surface, and start to see how that's connected. And even like the building behind it, you know, that will have a grid to help support that secondary skin. So it may not be this like really smooth surface. It's going to probably be somewhat segmented. And also we can start to see how these openings change. You know, we see that the form of it change because it's adapting to the twist, but we also need to see like the actual some of the elements that's responding, the variation of it moving up.
I think, Elise, an interesting idea that you should at least test is to turn off the light blue form onto which this is pasted as a skin, and then let it just become the structure itself. I was looking at some diagrid examples. If you Google on diagrid structure, okay, and you'll see a number of diagrid structures have ragged edges. They don't kind of cover it up and make it a clean edge between two edges. It's in and out and it's kind of woven. If you turn off that light blue form, then you've got this really interesting kind of edge condition that knits itself down at the edges. And I think that might be actually much more consistent with your patterning than having the patterning feel applied onto a blue glass skin underneath. At this point, it's form dominant, not skin or texture dominant. Get rid of the blue and it'll become texture dominant. And the form is implied as opposed to stated. I think that'd be a really interesting next step.
Yeah, I like that idea too. Kind of, in a way, your spiral tower is almost limiting you in that sense, where because it's such a smooth form, and this is a much more kind of fractured geometry that twists. And I think having the connections at the corner be jagged edges like that would really differentiate the tower itself, but also completely align with your narrative and the form that you've chosen as your pattern. I think that can add a level of detail that would really make this even more unique and something that's really quite different than a lot of towers.
I think that would be consistent with your molecular model in a sense. I mean, like DNA is not, you know, a clean helix. It's this lumpy, gnarly thing which ends up looking like a helix when you back out, but it doesn't have clean edges. And so in a certain sense, go for it. Let it be raw and ragged and a bunch of molecules and atoms all jammed together. And that might be more true to the actual metaphor.
It's almost, oh, go ahead.
I didn't have the smooth edges at first. That was kind of added in Illustrator. But yeah, it looked funky. It was cool. It looked kind of like snakeskin, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at that point, it almost feels like it would be like building blocks. You know, you almost have these three-dimensional forms that are being stacked up on the edges and twisting as they go up, and it'd be a lot different, really different texture than what's shown in this image. Yeah, I checked that out.
It's almost like a DNA strand that we're just skinning. You know, it'd be pretty cool to see, and how that's applied. You know, and that could be, I mean, and some of the details for that could be very, you know, really simple. I mean, it's almost like a space truss. You know, it's something that's like beauty and elegant when it's just that minimalistic, and then you're expressing it through the form.
Okay.
Well, great. Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Hey, Matt, you wanna go next?
You see that?
Yeah.
Okay. As I did last week, I started with the sail kind of idea in a grid, and I tried a lot of different things. So I took the sail and, you know, made like 50 different iterations and combined them into, you know, a module of 4, and then you know, did this skin here, which is flat. And then these past couple of weeks, it took me a while, but it took me hours of grasshopper finagling, but I was able to 3D print the 4 modules, and they don't print very well. They're very thin, and the supports that need to hold them up kind of break the whole things apart. So anyway, it kind of got me rethinking how things were. So I did print these modules and played around with them for a little bit. But then I went back in and took some some of the observations from last week and some of the things we had in the week before, and rewrote my module. Did you hear that? Sorry.
Oh, no. You mind repeating that?
Yeah, so I went back into, I took considerations of comments from last week and the week before, and went back in and rewrote my grasshopper script, and took that frame out of it, kind of made it a little bit more organic, and brought the sail edges out to the edges of my initial square parameter. And after hours of messing around with grasshopper and a little bit of Melissa's help, I was able to finally get it up onto a curved wall. So I started going with that, and then I started thinking about how this thing was going to go on the building, and we had talked 2 weeks ago about having like a steel structure, and just playing around with Lunchbox and kind of, I think it was Lunchbox, kind of what you had showed us with the grid making. I took each side of my building and gridded it out in a steel grid, and then I applied my skin to it, my module to it, so that it would hang on each grid, and then put everything together. So it would actually be almost like a substructure on the outside of the building itself. And in the end, I want this thing to react to the sun. I haven't gotten there yet because grasshopper has been a beast, and but I was happy to actually get the module on this thing and play with it from there. So these are some perspective. And these are all my grasshopper scripts. So, yep, that's what I have so far. And I think next steps for me are trying to get this thing to react to the sun, to be a somewhat of a shade, and then, you know, kind of act independently of each side. So.
Yeah, I'm curious on how it's going to react, because in all your other diagrams, it seems like this thing is going to be very light and airy, and now that you applied it on the building, it feels really heavy.
Yeah.
And I'm curious on how it can get back to that light, almost like fabric or sail shape that you did. But I'm glad that you took a step back, you rewrote the script. I think it's far more successful having that form be the dominant thing, being the dominant element, and then your structure kind of subsiding behind it, playing a secondary role. I think that's going to really help.
But I think I can also make the module bigger on the building. I mean, now it's set for each floor and each window opening, but I can easily, now that I got grasshopper, in grasp for this module, I can easily make it bigger so that it actually takes over like a couple floors or a couple openings. So.
I would totally do that. Like, that's the great thing with grasshopper, right? You can change it. You can subdivide the tower as many times you want to.
Yeah. Yep. I think so. Yeah. I mean, that could be in my next steps is try to, to tie this all together I think this is a right move to go this way rather than the other thing. The other thing was very hard to take the module and then make a bigger module out of the 4, and then for me to write that script, I was like, I couldn't. It was beyond me. So this makes a lot more sense.
Good.
I think another study you should do is try to set, and you might already have it, I don't know, but maybe try to set a domain on whatever your parameter is that controls the, call them pokies, right? Because they're really pokey in some spaces, some spots, and then they're a little bit less, but I'm trying to decide if they're all the same, but they're just twisted based on the, but I'm wondering if you know, do the study of like, changing the scale, because I think that'll help, but also if you change the domain of it, or limit the domain, I should say, to how far it comes off, you might also achieve a lighter feel because you might not have as much of it overlapping the next opening.
Yep.
Right? So I would try to play with that too and figure out what that, you know, what feels good there. But that might also be where your parameter from the sun exposure or sunlight, you know, whatever shading, whatever your parameter is, that might be where it gets input into your script as saying, oh, there's more sun here, it needs to be bigger, or there's less sun here, the domain needs to go down, and that might be where you control it at. But yeah, I think it. John's right. It does feel a little heavy. The image on the right here, it doesn't feel quite as heavy. But once you back out further and you get kind of into the context, it is a little bit heavier than anticipated. But looks cool though.
I think that the pokiness of it is, I mean, it's like a thistle now. It's actually rather astonishing. But on the other hand, I think control the domain, as Jason was saying, but also think of the material of this. It can all be metal, but you can make it out of a perf with increasing less density in each one of these things. So there ought to be a way to keep the shape. Certainly, this has the most astonishing drag that you could ever possibly imagine on a skyscraper. On a windy day, it was just like, wow. But on the other hand, you can make it slipperier by making it more perfed or more on open metal frame as opposed to quite so closed. So there may be some way to do it that way.
Yeah, that might be part of a rendering solution also. You know, if you just, another study you could do is, okay, when I render this out, let's just change the material. What does it look like if it's shiny metal, or what if it's, you know, what if it's glass? I mean, not that it will be, but what does it look like? You know, just do the quick iterations and studies to kind of get a feel for what makes it lighter and then what it wants to be. And,
I think from the beginning, I've always kind of thought it was fabric or metal. I do like the idea of fabric, but I think it's easier to produce than metal, to mass produce than metal. So
here's another issue, actually. Just to continue your metaphor, imagine a tall ship. All the sails aren't the same. You have a variety of sail types, and they decrease as you go up, and they behave differently. It's rigged differently, right? So rig your building differently, in the sense that it's not just one module. Maybe it's a variety. Maybe they get smaller at the top. They're thicker at the bottom. There are one floor at the top, and there are 3 floors at the bottom. And so in a sense, think of a variety of sail types, rigged differently.
Cool. All right.
No, thanks, nice. Matt. Good progress. All right. Michelle, do you wanna go next?
Sure. And I apologize for not being here last week. John knows what's going on. Trying to save lives. Let's see. Share. Where is it? Oh, I thought I had it up. Oh, I gotta just flip it over. Okay. Here we go. Can you guys see this? Okay. It has a lot of words on it. I was going to talk about this and then kind of go back, if that's okay, and show and Eric and Jason the fact that, you know, I did start out with a parametric panel, and that I'm really now breaking a lot of the rules with your permission, John. This is situated in Richmond, Virginia, the city, and it's a kind of a a center for, you know, excellence with regard to research. We have several biotechs. We have, you know, several other, you know, research centers and things of that nature, a, you know, prominent school that does lots of research in IRB and things like that. So we are actually constantly looking for more research spaces. So really just kind of going with the flow on this and thinking that, you know, an area we could look into is neuroscience research center, but it'll be used for other things, instructional spaces and so on and so forth. And, you know, as a representation of the primary goal of advancing research outcomes in the area of neuroscience, the skin of the building was inspired. I changed it up a little bit, and I'll explain, by the brain. It starts with two sides serving as one hemisphere of the brain and two other sides serving as the other. And then the connection between these hemispheres is kind of going to be where most of the parametric piece is going to be. It's called the corpus callosum, if anybody wants to know, but it's really going to be a piping network and a structural support with an opening in the building. The orientation of the building exterior has a 1-degree twist between each level in order to maximize the view from inside and allow for outdoor space in the city on each level. And so the idea is that the corners where there's additional exterior structural support, you can have kind of like a balcony space, which we are starting to do with some of our newer buildings. So I'm hoping it's feasible to do it on all of them, but if not, we could do every other side or something like that. Finally, the window tinting, I thought would be kind of a cool idea. We'll be thinking about monochromatic on one hemisphere to represent the analytical left side of the brain, and multicolored on the other hemisphere. And I was able to find some if you want to see. I don't know if it's feasible, but it looks like you put these tints on the window where it kind of has like this kind of color, and when it hits the light, it has like a bunch of different colors. All right, go forward. Okay. So this is kind of the main parameter that I really want to just stick with, and that's going to be the view. And so we've already done a parametric analysis to kind of see, you know, what is the best way to twist, or what type of twist is going to allow for the best view of what we want to see. And so we are doing a 1% twist on every floor for this particular building. And before I get into that, I kind of want to go back to just real quick. There we go. Can you see the like blue panel? Okay, so the initial thought was to kind of do the primary unit of the brain, which is the neuron, and really kind of focus on the neuron head. And this is what I presented last class, which was really kind of like, these are all individual panels, and looking at variations, and you can kind of put them in any way, shape, or form and connect them any different way. And then to simplify it, I stole 1/4 of the panel, and then this became parametric by, you know, seeing which, you know, how it responds in different ways. And I selected 5 here, but there's, you know, multiple. I think I had like 400 and something. And I had a really complex script, and then not too complex, but more complex than I have now. But the, just make sure I can see this for you guys. But in talking about it, instead of being so kind of literal, it was really kind of thinking about a really good suggestion to think about the connectivity of it. The whole point of the neuron in the brain is to have the connection and a flow. And so what we kind of really did is, well, actually, I'm going to go to this one first. So we have, you know, you have 2 different sides, just to show that it's 2 different sides of the brain. A lot of times when you're seeing them in pictures, they're representing the right side with lots of different colors, which kind of goes with the, you know, the tinted windows. Sort of thinking about, go ahead and do that so you can kind of see and visualize the hemispheres. And then this part right here, the corpus callosum, is really, it connects the 2 brains, and it's all the neurons. So it is transmission and it's connecting. And so I probably should put this in a different order. So this is sort of what I'm thinking about. So you have two different sides. So the one, this has two different, it's split into two. And then on, in between these two are these connections right here. And this was split up and done in Grasshopper. Spheres were made to kind of represent the head, and then they have the bars for the axon. I think the next step, and I played with it a little bit, but it didn't quite work out, is to have some like articulation. That would be, I think, a really interesting idea to add to that, to kind of demonstrate sort of like the myelin sheaths on the neuron that connects it. This is a closer look at it, just to kind of go back and show this. This is sort of representing this piece here. This is sort of, all of these lines are representing the axon portions that connect into the spheres, keeping it really simplified without going too crazy, because I have to edit myself down because I want to do a lot of crazy things sometimes. And then this is just kind of showing that there's two sides for each hemisphere. I just selected this lavender purpley color to show the one side that would be nice to kind of have that multiple tint potentially, and then just using the gray right now to represent the analytical or kind of regular side. And actually I had a lot of script and then I deleted it all out because this is all I needed to make that happen. So, and that's what I have so far.
So I was, it's interesting because I'm, okay, that tissue that you use, that you talked about, that connects the two pieces together, the two sides of the brain, that's like the key thing. It's great that, that you're kind of expressing the two different sides of the brain with glass. That's pretty interesting. But that element, though, is probably the most important piece. And that's where I'm interested in how you articulate that more, because that detail, I mean, you're expressing it as just like just as some cross bracing. It seems like that's the piece that you want to express the most, and we're hiding it now. And it's like it's something. It's like, I think you might want to flip it, but also there's a lot of important details that when we talk that were important, like the segments of the nerve and how that was important, and how we can express that on the facade. And the design was not about the modularity of it, but it was about the connectivity of the vertical connectivity of it, of the building. I'm curious on just some of the decisions that you took on that got you here.
So, well, I admit the articulation piece with the, I was thinking the piping piece, I was trying to work with the variable piping of some sort, but it wasn't working out. So I have to go back to that and figure out how to articulate that. But the idea was, to use the concept of it to create some type of structural connectivity. And if this section becomes an open section to the outside, potentially, obviously the floors aren't here. I just did the skin. I'd have to add the floors, and I'd also have to have the safety, safety on there. That this would really kind of, my thought was create some like some shear structure in the corners, without blocking the view, because that's one of the primary objectives. Is the whole building was shaped to kind of see the appropriate views. I could go, there was thoughts to kind of go crazier and mix things in a little bit, but at the same time I also wanted to, I find I have to edit myself a lot, so I wanted to kind of have a simple shape and not have it be like, when you first look at it, I don't want to see a brain, I don't want to necessarily see a neuron. And that's sort of why when I did the neuron panel, I took a quarter of it so that it wasn't so literal. It was just inspired by it. But
well,
Maybe I missed something.
No, it's part. I think maybe you played it too safe. I think that I think there was a lot. There's a lot of good content that we had that could inspire just like that. Like instead of just doing, there's so many different ways that we can do lateral bracing or that crisscross, and that's where your concept can be inspirational. Like if it is like the nerves within that that connection piece, or it's the structure within that connection piece, use that as an inspiration. And like we're moving past, like your building is very reminiscent of a Fordism building. Fordism was all about mass production, mass producing the same thing over and over again. And we're starting to get past that now. And now we're starting to become more of a post-Fordism society where it's no longer about mass production, but it's more about mass customization. So you can customize, you can design. We're in such an exciting time right now in design. You can make steel look like spaghetti if you want to. It's so I wouldn't worry about being conservative and making sure, okay, I don't want to go too crazy. The construction industry is so advanced through fabrication, go crazy. Let's explore. And it's all about how well you can express that concept. And that's what we're, that's part of the assignment, but it's all, there's two parts. There's like the design side, but there's also that scripting side, and they go hand in hand. But, so that's where it was just like, it's something that you could look into more, doing a simple lab, a pipe and then, a sphere as a connection, I don't think it's doing justice on how your concept. I think it's a really interesting concept because it's interesting. It's that little connection between our two brains is incredibly important. And there's so much that we can learn from it and express it and how that could be a large design feature on the exterior, but then we put glass right over it, or the detail is super small. What if we make it larger? Maybe it takes up, 3 or 4 floors, or, it's like different ways that we can.
Yeah, I have it. This isn't a parametric form. So, I played multiple times. I did, the truss version. I did the hexagonal version. I did the diagrid version. I did all different types of versions. I divided it up. I divided it smaller, many per floor, and then I did it longer as well, and then I did it smaller wide. So I played around with a bunch of ones, and this one I selected because I liked it. I know that's the dirty word in architecture, but I selected this one because I thought it, but it was a lot of different interesting shapes, but this one looked like something that actually could be potentially built. Some of them were kind of like free floating and did some weird things, and some of them were too close together and they started looking more like honeycombs instead of more like a hexagon, which is sort of what I was kind of going for like a pseudo circular. So yeah, and then I was thinking, okay, well, if you make it longer, that's fine. We could do that too. I didn't know about expanding it further onto the actual, and I have to add I have the script already for the sides of the buildings. I just need to create the like mullion and window panels to just slam onto the building. But I didn't know about putting this all over the whole building. I could.
But yeah. It's interesting how you described your process, right? You tried these certain components, you didn't like it. You tried a honeycomb pattern, you didn't like it. You tried, and that's one thing about this that I'm glad you said it, because it's one thing that that we're trying to strive not to do, because now we're saying the tool is driving the design. And at the end of the day, this is a tool. We're the designers that are supposed to be driving it, right? So instead of just picking these certain components and trying it out, it's like, well, what does the design concept tell us to do? You know, what does that inspire us to do? Not just pick and choose all these different tools. It's using that design process for us, that process to help drive to a tool or a conclusion. You know, it may not be a grasshopper tool at all if the process is that, but and that's where it's like, what does the brain, what does your concept of that nerve tell you it should be?
Okay. I mean, I think it was a give and take of both because, you know, I was using the tool to kind of see what I can do. I think as most of us probably are, but also there was things that like when I used the tool and I got it, I was like, I don't like that. I don't think it fits what I'm looking for. So I think it was kind of a give and take, but I guess I'm missing the mark here. So
No, you're.
I did have to reinvent the wheel a little bit, but okay.
No,
I'm a little lost what to do next, but other than keep playing around with it.
Yeah, no, I honestly, I think it and trust me, I've done this. We've all done the same thing, and it's something that's new. We do that, and I think really like the next step is let's take a step back at your concept, you know, and what about that concept that is inspirational about it? What are key elements that we want to draw from, and how can we take that into the next step? And you know, I wouldn't worry about grasshopper right now. It's because once we have that next step, then we have the information to put that into grasshopper. It's you know, it's like what is the function of that nerve or that bridging that's essential to your concept.
So my first comment here is I think you're being too rigid, kind of literally, with the completing the corner of the building with your structure. Because if I'm understanding this right, your building is two buildings that have a very thin opening all the way between them, correct? So
just on that edge.
Oh, you're just cutting the edge off?
Yeah. It's not really cut off. It's really it's like balconies. I have to build
Gotcha.
inside.
Okay. So I guess where I was going to start going with that is if your building is two separate buildings with a thin space between them, then and you kind of cut off these corners and just kind of flatten them off, then all of a sudden you have your two sides of the brain that are completely separate, right? It's two buildings, and then your design is actually the space between the buildings. And what that space is. Maybe it's bridges connecting the people, the social aspect of the building between both sides of the building. Or maybe it's structural elements that go through and are actually supporting the building. But I think that there's something, the thing that interested me the most about it is you have this stripe that seems like it should go all the way through the building, in my opinion. And then your design solution is between those two things. You let the outside be simple and, you know, clean and elegant, and then the inside is where you really express something really cool. And think big. You know, I know you said you have to kind of edit yourself, and that's good. It's good to edit yourself, but I think you took it a step too far here. Let it be a little bit crazier. Don't worry so much about, you know, whether or not it's going to get built because it's a studio class. That's important to remember. Just have fun with it and do something cool, because you have, you know, your concept is a lot bigger than your solution is right now. And I think if you can bring your solution up to where your concept is, you'll have a really great building.
Well, and that's some good feedback because, you know, I was thinking about the interior at one point, but then I was like, okay, we're worrying about the exterior right now. So I guess I don't think
you can divorce the two so much. I really do. I agree with Jason, most definitely, and say that for being at all true to your concept, I don't think you can talk about the brain in two sides without saying this building is cleaved in two. It just makes no sense. It denies the metaphor. I think you should go for it, like Jason said. It's two triangles. Now, here's a suggestion. The mystery of the brain, I think, is that you've got a left and a right that look the same, but they act differently. Why is that? We don't know, okay? But they're made of the same stuff, gray matter, right, okay? Look at your diagrid, and this is an actually really interesting aspect of diagrids that you've got there. They have inherent vertical and horizontals, and then they have inherent diagonals. And so if you look at buildings like 30 St. Mary Axe, it's a diagrid, and it's perfectly equilateral, right? There's no inherent twist to that building. The twist is only achieved by how you then wrap something around going in one direction or going in another direction like this or going like that. So the nature of the skin then overlays it with a directionality. You could take your diagrid and on one half of the brain emphasize the horizontal and vertical. One side, you have dominant horizontal and vertical members. They're there. You could choose to hierarchically choose them on one side. And on the other side of the building, you could choose to emphasize the diagonals like this. It's the exact same grid, except you're giving a different emphasis, one side versus the other. And then maybe the slot is full of actual space frame, space frame interlocking things, which is more like the corpus callosum. So I think that you could actually take what you've got here and clean it up and use the grid that you've got in a variety of ways consistent with the class, and have it be really, stick tightly to your metaphor.
That's a great idea.
In other words, you've got it there already. It's there. Just use that diagrid and then take it to to the logical extension based on mapping your metaphor.
Do you think I should go for the articulation on the piping? It just didn't work out.
Not think of it as directionality. It doesn't have to be articulation in the piping. It's directionality.
Okay.
And so half your brain is rational, okay, and grid-like. Half of your brain is diagonal and funky, okay. And I mean that actually sticks to the metaphor a little well, pretty well. But what it does is it basically says is the brain cells on one side look like the brain cells on the other, but they do different things. And so how can you approach it in that way?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
That's great. Thank you. All right. Ruby, do you want to go next? Oh, Ruby? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
Let's see, share. All right. So for me, I'm still drudging along with my module concept and totally scripting it. So the module is finally 100% scripted with each variable node. So for these 4 corners, or actually the 8 corners, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there are 12 nodes of adjustment, but this is the base module. All right, so a part of my understanding that I had this wellness journey was using a study, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of wellness, and having the base modules thicker, heavier in the wellness journey. And then I really liked the suggestion from the last crit of just the diamond, but I wanted that to be like a journey, so that eventually coming to it just being the diamond is where they're shedding a lot of the insecurity of that, the heavy frame that comes along with the journey. And I haven't scripted the facade just yet, but this is what the hierarchy I'm imagining in my design development so far would look like as it, as the module traverses up the skin of the building. And together it looks like this, where it literally tapers into the diamond, and the diamond, the journey, the diamond itself becomes much bigger because these interior nodes here are flexible, they move. When this node moves, the diamond gets bigger, and so on. So that's where I am so far.
No, I think that concept's really interesting, and how that is, how it's almost the frame is shedding, and I think that's really, really cool. Yeah, and I like how it's just the frame is eroding away, and then we can talk about how, you know, how those elements are supported, and we talked similar to last time about it. But no, I think this is really interesting. I'm eager to see how it works on your facade, on your form.
Yeah, the last crit inspired the taper. At first it was just that base module and the rotation of it, but the last crit inspired the taper to eventually shedding the weight of what drew a person to seeking wellness. And so that is finally 100% scripted, and that took me a hot minute.
So I think my suggestion is, or just kind of comment is, I like that you're shedding the frame, and I like the story of it, the metaphor that you have going, and, you know, achieving wellness. But I'm wondering if well, maybe it's a question still. Let's put it that way. What if the diamond starts out as the square? The diamond is the frame, and then instead of just the frame changing as you move up, the actual diamond is being formed. So at the bottom you have a square, and then each step up, it's, you know, maybe the sides taper down a little bit to kind of have the diamond form, and then you're shedding off, and you're almost chiseling away at the form as you move up your building and up the pyramid to self-actualization. And then that way you're revealing the diamond, so you almost don't realize the diamond's there until you discover it at a certain point. And then it's more of a journey where, as you experience the building, as you look up at, you don't always see that it's the same diamond moving up, or the same size of diamond, but really you start to understand that it's opening up more and becoming that. So it's more of the journey.
Okay, so as in accentuate that the frame may be heavy, like at first, and sort of,
yeah, so
the person is sort of disappeared or drowning in whatever they're going through.
Yeah, so and I'm thinking the frame might just end up going away, right?
Yeah.
That way you have
yeah,
the diamond, like however that diamond is mounted is how the rest of them will be mounted. And then you have, so instead of there being a square or a rectangle around all of them, it's just slowly becoming smaller and smaller from maybe that initial square, and it turns into the diamond shape. I think that could be an interesting solution to it, and is really a kind of a dialogue on discovery and, you know, moving up the pyramid, so to speak, or the building.
Well, I've scripted every node to be movable, so that's possible. I can, yeah.
I think that, Jason, yeah, that it's that journey, it's the transformation from, you know, being a square to a diamond, you know, to this like very, yeah, I think something like that, I mean, it just adds that extra level to this, to the whole narrative, and yeah, that would be amazing.
So you might use the word a matrix. It arises from the matrix, or the matrix material, right? And so, as opposed to thinking of it as a frame, it's undifferentiated stuff, and then gradually it begins to define itself and become the one final thing. That way, it may keep some sense of foreground and background, and this thing is arising from the background, from the matrix, as opposed to calling it a frame, literally a frame. It can be a background substance that the diamond arises from. And I think that you can keep your scripted nodes. I think that it's a question of how you think about that background material that it arises from.
I like that idea. I want to use it. Okay.
Remind me, are diamonds metamorphic as rocks, or are they igneous? I forget. These rocks all have, like types, right? And it's one of the two, but it definitely, gets to being a diamond by virtue of being squeezed and, deriving itself from its carbon.
Under pressure.
Right,
yes.
Yeah, exactly, whatever it's done. Yeah, and so it's at the bottom of the building, so it's being squeezed, right? I don't know.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
But I think, broadening your thought from frame to matrix might give you more opportunities for that background thing.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. All right. Thanks, Ruby. This was great. Thank you. Hey, Scott, you want to go next?
Do. I'm sorry, I was late. Let's see. All right. Can you see my screen? Let me go back up here. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about kind of doing this. Well, I haven't geolocated this yet. I'm still kind of working on the details for the skin, but we talked about kind of this veil to that would be able to kind of react to the building skin itself. And this veil would be used for shading and primarily for shading and screening and to assist on some of the reflectivity of the building. And we had talked about working on some of the aperture sizes and the thicknesses, and I'm still kind of toying with that. I haven't run the full script yet because it takes so long, as Jason kind of alluded, with the opening sizes. So I'm just trying to work on the scale. I've got it applied to the building. And so these have been the shapes that we presented earlier, and now this is actually kind of applied to the building. So I've kind of figured out how to do the offset the way I want to, and it's really just running the variations of the aperture sizes. This is kind of the base scale that I'm thinking of for this skin. And so I've actually got a couple of screenshots here. Again, I don't want it to feel too heavy. I want it to feel like it kind of drapes on the building a little bit more. Materiality, like we talked about, was really just kind of metal, aluminum, a skin that just kind of stands off. So I have some enlarged views I'll show you here. So these aren't multicolored. Those are just the actual, that's the depth of the material as it applies. And the shadowing, I didn't turn all that on again because this takes so long, but there's, right now, this is about 2 feet off of the building, and I don't want it to go too far because it'll encroach on the property lines. But you can actually see kind of how this feels. It's a little heavy as far as the overall thickness of the material, but it's going, I think, kind of the way I wanted to on this building based on the scale and height of the building. And so yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm going. And then of course my script. But so I think this is, to me, was more of a progress. So that's what I wanted to kind of review with you. the direction. I think the last time you wanted to see it applied to the building, so that's where I wanted to get to, and then just start working on fine tuning.
So you imagine the offsets of the openings are going to adjust.
Yeah,
and
I think the aperture size will probably vary more than the thickness of the material. I think you start to lose it just based on the scale. So the aperture size to me starts to become more crucial. I've got the settings kind of varied, and I need to, of course, run it to actually create like the full skin, but I needed to start with the base to present to you so that you understand the scale. This is a 56-story building, so you can see kind of the scale of the openings where they start. If they get too dense, you start to lose it, or if they get too large, then it kind of looks silly. So I'm trying to be mindful about how much, and then I do want to get it up off the base, which I haven't worried about.
So what in thickness, do you mean thickness by width or actually like sticks out from the building?
Sticks out, yeah. So the thickness of the material and how far it protrudes from the building. So
yeah. I remember last conversation we had, we envisioned this to be something like chainmail where there is like this overlap and this interaction of the two. Have you started looking more into that?
I'm just trying to figure out. Well, I think I'm trying to figure out how I want the scheme to play out on the building. Now that I have my modules and kind of the theme, I've just been kind of toying with a bit, like kind of a benchmark, so that I could adjust it from there to get that variation that we talked about. So.
Yeah, I think getting that depth to it, and it'd be interesting to even see how if we could start to have that impression of these things interacting through thickness. It'd be interesting to start to see and study, along with the apertures adjusting.
Might you flip the understanding of it, Scott, to as opposed to being about the apertures in the skin, be about the size of the members, and let so in a certain sense you might be able to go back to a close up of your skin. There, okay. So if you imagine, so you have essentially, hexagons or flattened squares, but you might have available, the thickness of a member on any given floor, and that you could maybe vary them. One way to make this a not completely symmetrical pattern is to say that all the members going this way are one thickness, and all the members going that way are another thickness, or maybe they're equal at the bottom, and then they become variously dominant at the top or something or other. And so changing the aperture basically kind of makes it symmetrical. Thinking of it as a series of members with thicknesses will certainly change the aperture, but it gives you more variables to work with, perhaps.
No, that's actually a great point. The thickness, I understand with the thickness, which would tend to be more chainmail-like. And as far as the apertures, I'm thinking that they'll vary as they go up the building. Was kind of what I was thinking as far as the sizes. Not that they would all be consistent or that they would all just taper up, but that they could vary throughout the facade there. I'll have to get with John on how to do the thickness part to vary the different leg sizes.
I can see it really.
That's clever. I like it.
Here's actually an interesting detail, and I'm not sure whether you have them out on the prairie where there's silos. There's typically hoop rings around the silos to keep the downward pressure. Frequently, when you see the hoop rings come like this, they're joined going like this. Okay.
Yeah.
Cinched like that, and it's a really gorgeous little detail because it's so simple going around here like that, and it goes and does that in the joints. Imagine that you prioritized everything going like this in one direction, okay? And so you'd have a framework, essentially made up of lapping sets of pieces that went like this, and then give it a twist directionality. Maybe I'm just suggesting there'd be ways to take this patterning and give it a directionality that would be quite gorgeous because they're sort of lapping like this.
Yeah. No, that would actually be a beautiful detail.
Yeah, I think if you kind of take those suggestions and run with them, really looking at it as a grid rather than, it feels more like a perforated pattern almost. But the grid adds another dimension to it where, especially overlapping them like that and changing the directionality, because your tower is twisting, but you can make it appear like it's, almost not twisting or twisting the opposite way based on how you just prioritize the members that are going up. But then those also end up becoming the kind of structural or, really a part of the building and not just something that's applied to it. And really integrating more than one system is, makes something even more interesting or more beautiful. A lot of the times, at least.
Yeah, no, I like it. Yeah. Okay, I hadn't really thought of that, but yeah. Right.
Those are all really good ideas, yeah. But all right, well, thanks, Scott.
All right, thank you.
And that wraps it up for tonight. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Jason, for stopping by and again giving some great feedback and just a lot of good discussions. And yeah, thank you all. And we'll keep going. We'll next week I expect to see some updates. We'll start working on stuff and start making progress to part 3. Part 3 is our final. So that will have everything plus the requirements for part 3 into it. And for those of you that are still having a little bit a struggle, we'll talk offline. We'll get some office hours. I know this weekend I scheduled like 2 hours. So some of you guys showed up. And I also posted up on YouTube that if you're curious on any of the answers that I had, but we can do the same thing if needed on Saturday. I can pull some time. We can all talk, and also in the evenings during the weekdays. But thank you, everyone. This was great, and we didn't go as late as last time. So thank you all again, and thank you again, Eric and Jason, for this.
We'll see you at the final. Very good. Looking forward to it.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Good job.
Good one.